Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Trump welcomes Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to the White House. The Kremlin warns Kyiv against attacks as Russia pushes ahead with its planned 72-hour ceasefire. Friedrich Merz prepares to be sworn in as German chancellor despite falling short of the majority vote earlier today. And prophecy makers, we speak to a former Simpsons writer as the show is credited with predicting the future. Now to our top story, and President Trump has welcomed Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to the White House in the first meeting between the two leaders. Carney recently won the Canadian election and has been outspoken about Trump's tariffs and his comments regarding Canada as the 51st state. The former Bank of England and Bank of Canada governor has vowed to stand up to Trump during his face-to-face in the Oval Office. Ahead of the meeting, President Trump took to Truth Social and said, "I look forward to meeting the new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. I very much want to work with him, but cannot understand one simple truth. Why is America subsidizing Canada by $200 billion a year, in addition to giving them free military protection and many other things? We don't need their cars, we don't need their energy, we don't need their lumber, and don't need anything they have other than their friendship, which hopefully we will always maintain. They, on the one hand, need everything from us." Let's go live to the Oval Office now and listen into Trump and Carney, who are currently holding a press conference.
Canadian security and our partnership, and I'll say this as well, that the president has revitalized international security, revitalized NATO, and us playing our full weight in NATO, and that will be part of it.
And they have, I must say, Canada is stepping up the military participation because Mark knew, they were low and now they're stepping it up, and that's a very important thing. But never say never. Never say never.
What would it take to get the tariffs off of Canada?
Well, we'll be talking about different things. Look, we want to protect our automobile business, and so does Mark. But we want to make the automobiles, and we want to, we have a tremendous abundance of energy, more than any country. We have, just in Alaska alone, ANWR has been reopened now. ANWR is probably the largest find anywhere in the world. They say it's larger than Saudi Arabia. I don't know, but it's a lot. But we have tremendous amounts of energy. Other countries don't. We're both lucky in that way. They have energy, we have energy. We have more than we can ever use and more than we could ever sell, actually, and you have the same thing. So we're two countries that are very lucky. If you look at China, they don't have that. It's a big disadvantage. Other countries, most countries don't have, most countries don't have that. So Canada and us, we have a lot of advantages over other places.
When you consider what Mr. Carney just said, that Canada is not for sale, does this make the discussion a little more difficult to start on?
No, not at all. No, not at all. No, time will tell. It's only time. But I say never. I've had many things that were not doable, and they ended up being doable, and only doable in a very friendly way. But if it's to everybody's benefit, Canada loves us and we love Canada. That's, I think, the number one thing that's important. But we'll see. I mean, over time, we'll see what happens. China.
I was hoping you can clarify something. Earlier this morning in Capitol Hill, Secretary Dasha said that they're having no negotiations yet with China. You have said something different.
They want to meet, and they're doing no business right now. And those ships are turning around in the Pacific Ocean. Big turn. Those are big ships. Those ships take about 10 miles to turn. And, we lost $1 trillion to China on trade.
We can now go live to Washington for reaction with our correspondent, Nick Harper. Nick, it is a very vibrant press hustle going on right now in the Oval Office. Mark Carney hasn't held back when it comes to his feelings on Donald Trump. We've just seen a snapshot of the first meeting. How's things going?
Yeah, Leigh-Ann, that's right. Mark Carney coming to Washington promising to stand up to Donald Trump on various issues like trade. But at the beginning of that meeting, it seemed that there was a very friendly exchange between the two of them. Donald Trump congratulating Mark Carney on his win, becoming the Canadian Prime Minister last week. Mark Carney, in turn, thanking Donald Trump not just for his hospitality, but also for his leadership. He said that he was a transformational president and had been securing the world. Mark Carney also suggesting that the two countries shared various common goals, including securing the borders, pushing back against illegal drugs like fentanyl, and trying to work together on their economy. He said that US and Canada relations were stronger when the two countries worked together. But there has been that one point of contention so far during this Oval Office meeting, those repeated threats from Donald Trump to make Canada the 51st state of America. And during that exchange, a little while ago in the Oval Office, Donald Trump again said he wanted to make Canada the 51st state, to which Mark Carney said Canada is not for sale ever. There are some places that are never for sale. Donald Trump saying, never say never. Over time, we'll see what happened. You mentioned a moment ago that social media post from Donald Trump, posted just 7 minutes before Mark Carney was due to arrive. Very combative in tone, essentially asking what can Canada provide to the United States, when Donald Trump said that at this stage, really there is nothing. Lumber, he said, is not something that the US wants. Cars is also something that the US does not want. So interesting negotiations playing out there in front of the world's media.
Nick Harper in Washington, thank you so much for your quick reaction and assessment there of that Oval Office meeting between Donald Trump and Mark Carney. But let's get into this further with Len Khodorkovsky, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. I do apologize, Len. Len, thank you so much for joining us. We've just seen a bit of a raucous meeting in front of the press with Mark Carney and also with Donald Trump. There's a lot at stake during this meeting between the two men. What do we know about the kind of relationship these two have?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Leigh-Ann. I think regardless of the personality component of every relationship, we have to put the negotiations here in context. Whereas over the last 30, 40 years, we've seen since the end of the Cold War, the trade imbalance has been favoring other countries, and politicians in the United States have made it possible to outsource many manufacturing jobs, which created a disadvantage for American manufacturers, which created large deficits, large trade imbalances, depressed job growth, and lower wages. And what you're seeing in President Trump's approach to this issue is long overdue. And in the short term, there will be some turbulence, but I expect that friends will work things out in the long term.
Donald Trump has said he does not understand why America is subsidizing Canada by $200 billion a year. As you said in that statement we're looking at on Truth Social that he wrote. Why is America subsidizing Canada?
Well, I think this previous status quo has been that outsourcing is good, that we should rely on certain products from other countries because they're cheaper. The calculation was conscious. It was made by politicians and business leaders. I think we are at a point where our trade deficits are too big to ignore. We're at a point where we have a $36 trillion debt. And, if we don't do something about it, then it's going to not just undermine the American economy, it's going to undermine the global economy. And, somebody had to do something about it. And President Trump and his team are stepping up.
Len, I just want to ask you a question about tariffs. Obviously, Donald Trump has, in many ways, did Liberation Day, announced the tariffs on other countries. And after that, we've seen a real decline in the US stock market. And a lot of people are predicting that the US economy could now enter a recession due to these tariffs. We saw GDP in the States was down quite significantly. How will this impact the economy, the tariffs, and also what will it mean for the midterm elections? Because a lot of the reason Donald Trump did achieve his term in the White House and win that election was promising American people they would have more money in their pockets.
I think we have to look at a couple of components here. In the short term, obviously, there's some turbulence, as I mentioned. President Trump has decided to transition our economy into a different, using a different formula that's going to rebalance things in a direction of American manufacturers. So that transition period is going to cause some uncertainty. Obviously, stock markets and business leaders like certainty. So I expect in the short term, where we have a built-in period of transition. But in the long term, no one really can tell where we're going to end up because no one has done this before. So where we net out, and depending on the kinds of deals that President Trump and the leaders of our other countries, including Canada, strike, perhaps we'll end up in a better place where we were. As far as the stock market goes, I think we saw a little dip over the last month or so. It's bounced back. Things are fairly stable at this point, but it's hard to judge where we're going to end up in a year and a half for midterms at this early juncture. I expect that after a deal or two are announced, everybody will figure out where the economy is going, and I think we're going to end up in a stable, secure, and positive position.
Len, let's move back to Carney and Trump. This meeting is ultimately about the future of the economy in Canada and tariffs. What will be a good result in tariffs for Mark Carney? What exactly will he be looking for from Donald Trump?
Well, like every country, they certainly don't want their goods to be priced higher than other goods because it makes it less likely that consumers will buy them. So I think as far as Canada is concerned and others, they want to mitigate the potential economic threat from higher prices. So I suspect that in addition to just lowering the overall number, the percentage of new tariffs that the United States has threatened to place on Canada, Mark Carney has to be responsive to the constituency that elected him. And there was a lot of emotional wind behind his sails. Certainly there was a lot of there was a Trump factor in the Canadian election, so I think he's going to have to be responsive, protecting his own industries, key industries, and we'll see how that nets out. But at the end of the day, Canada is dependent on the United States in their key industries. They export more to us than we export to them. So I suspect that reasonable people will come out with a reasonable solution to this issue.
You know what? Actually, you brought up something that I thought was quite interesting, Len. Many people say if it wasn't for Donald Trump, Mark Carney would have not won the election. So Carney has quite a lot to thank Trump for, really.
In one way, you're right. Our position since since the Canadian election has been in full swing has, I think, affected the minds of certain voters in Canada. I believe a lot of 60-plus aged voters came out in large numbers, largely due to the patriotic fervor over the last few months. At the end of the day, these are two people that are experienced. They know how to make deals. President Trump, from his perspective, is interested in what's best for the United States. And so is the Prime Minister of Canada interested in what's best for Canada. The deals that they strike will take into consideration their own electorates. But at the end of the day, President Trump has to answer to his electorate, and Mark Carney has to answer to his. The proof will be in the pudding.
Yes, absolutely. It always is in the pudding, actually, Len. But if we just move on, I want to shift gears slightly and ask you about the next round of talks between Iran and the US. This is the nuclear talks. Apparently, they're likely to go ahead in Oman this weekend. Trump has threatened to bomb Iran if no agreement is reached with his administration to resolve this long-standing dispute. What do you think we can expect from these talks going further ahead?
The talks regarding Iran have many different facets. First and foremost, from the American perspective, the regime in Iran poses a national security threat to the United States, which is why we've been trying to solve the issue of their weaponized nuclear program. It's always been a threat. President Obama and President Biden took one course of action to resolve this issue. President Trump took another. When I served in the first Trump administration, we put in a policy of maximum pressure to ensure that the regime in Iran is first and foremost unable to produce a nuclear weapon, that it is unable to produce a delivery system, the missile system that can deliver those nuclear warheads, that it would stop funding its terrorist proxies, that it would stop taking American hostages. I believe that is the perspective of President Trump, and the course of action that he is going to take is going to, first and foremost, be based on what is in the best interest of the United States population. And the job of the American president, constitutionally, first and foremost, is to defend Americans. And that's why you're seeing President Trump puts so much emphasis on preventing the world's top state sponsor of terrorism from attaining a nuclear weapon.
Len Khodorkovsky, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Brilliant to have your insights. I appreciate you joining me this evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leigh-Ann.
Now, Russia still intends to go ahead with a planned 72-hour ceasefire from Thursday, despite recent attacks. Russia targeted the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv after Ukrainian drone attacks on Moscow forced the closure of the city's airports overnight. Dmitry Peskov said the Kremlin had not heard from Ukraine in regards to the three-day ceasefire and warned the country would respond if Ukraine did try to strike. We can now cross live to Moscow to speak to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, thank you so much for joining us. The airports in Moscow shut for a few hours, but is there concern that potential Ukraine strikes could affect Moscow's World War II parade, which is happening this week?
Well, indeed, we have seen the barrage of the Ukrainian drones attacking the Russian regions. Moscow alone has been attacked by at least 19 drones that have been shot by the Russian air defense systems overnight. All 4 international airports in Moscow have been temporarily shut. And actually, later in the day, when they were already reopened, there was another suspension in air traffic because more Ukrainian drones attacked the Russian capital. The Kremlin, however, is saying that the work of the Russian air defense systems is efficient. That's the official statement from Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, and undoubtedly Moscow is tightening its security for the holding of the festivities of the Victory Day. Moscow has already announced that there will be mobile connectivity disruptions throughout the celebrations, and also we know that Moscow will be hosting many international leaders, and undoubtedly Moscow is doing everything possible to make sure that things go smoothly, but Moscow is prepared to any provocation by the Ukrainian Ukrainian side.
It's been reported that US World War II veterans will also attend. Can you tell us any more about this, Dasha?
That's right. We had the confirmation from the Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov that there will be indeed veterans from the United States as well as Israel, Armenia and Mongolia attending the ceremonial events. And on top of that, we know that there will be decorated troops from some countries that will be also marching through Moscow's Red Square in this victory parade. And undoubtedly, that's a very important signal. Moscow also will be hosting at least 29 heads of states. Moscow says it is also very important because it shows that Moscow is not isolated, and it does show that there are many countries worldwide that are willing to celebrate this important holiday in the Russian capital. As for the potential of leveling this up, we've heard before that there were reports of a potential high-level American guest attending those events, but no official confirmation has come so far with regard to that.
And Dasha, just quickly, Putin called for a 3-day ceasefire. Ukraine says it wants a longer truce. Is this likely?
Well, we heard the Kremlin saying very clearly that Russia's proposed 3-day ceasefire for the celebrations of Victory Day was a sort of test to assess Kyiv's readiness to hold peace negotiations and to really embark on to finding the negotiated settlement. Moscow still says that there's been no positive reply from the Ukrainian side, but as for the longer truce, Moscow has been quite against that, suggesting that that would not serve Russian interests on the ground and would only allow the Ukrainian side to regroup and to rearm. Meanwhile, the Kremlin spokesman has most recently said that Kyiv is demonstrating by its behavior and those attacks against the Russian regions its nature and its unwillingness to really engage in peace negotiations.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. An Israeli airstrike has struck the Sana'a International Airport in Yemen's capital. Israel confirmed it carried out the attack targeting infrastructure sites. Israeli forces claim these were being used to transfer weapons and operatives by the Houthis. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has told the National Guard to shed 20% of its top positions. Hegseth said the eliminations were a reflection of Trump wanting the right people around him to execute the national security approach. Multiple explosions of fires have hit Sudan's capital, Port Sudan. Plumes of smoke emerged from the main maritime port, where hundreds of thousands of displaced people have sought refuge. Military sources have blamed the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. And Chinese travellers' spending rose 8% year-on-year during the May Day holiday. The holiday, one of the country's longest, is closely watched as a barometer of Chinese consumer confidence. The Tourism Ministry recorded 314 million domestic trips during the holiday, an increase of 6.5%. Now, Friedrich Merz has been sworn in as German chancellor. That's despite failing in the first parliamentary ballot earlier today, forcing German MPs to vote again. Merz, leader of the CDU-CSU Conservative, becomes the 10th chancellor since the end of the Second World War. We can now go live to Berlin to speak to journalist James Jackson. James, great to have you on the show again. Friedrich Merz is Germany's new chancellor, but there was an unexpected hurdle today. Tell us a little bit more.
This has been a massively bumpy start to Merz's term as chancellor. Now, Merz is a former lawyer, so you would think he would be good at negotiations, but what happened was he couldn't even get enough votes from his own coalition to become chancellor in the first round. Now, for viewers in the UK or Italy, this might sound quite normal, but this is actually the first time this has ever happened in post-war Germany's political system. So he's really clearly annoyed some figures within his own coalition group, whether that's from the coalition partners on the centre-left, the Social Democrats, or within his own party, because he did, of course, work with the far right, or at least vote with them earlier this year, and that left clearly a nasty taste in some people's mouths.
James, let's chat about the far right. We've spoken about it before, the AfD party, who did perform well in the elections, but are not part of this ruling coalition. Have we had any reaction at all from the leader of the AfD?
Of course. So Alice Weidel, co-leader of the AfD, said that this was a sign that, you know, Friedrich Merz should start again and hold new elections because, you know, an hour or so ago, it wasn't actually clear if Merz would become chancellor. So shocking was this development. So the AfD are #1 in the polls, and they think they would do much better if another election was held. But of course, maybe this intervention from Alice Weidel didn't actually help her party, because that's quite possibly what got the wavering members of the new government coalition to vote for Merz, hold their nose and keep the AfD away from power.
Right, OK, so the European Union is currently preparing a response to US tariffs. I just wanted to know, James, where does this leave Germany, which is Europe's largest economy, and Merz as the person who has to negotiate somewhat for Germany?
This is a really good question, because I think Germans were really shocked and caught surprise with Trump's tariff war. Trump has frequently lashed out at Germany, in particular the former Chancellor Angela Merkel, about not spending enough on defense, particularly not carrying their weight, as Trump would put it. But what Merz has done is shown a certain decisiveness that was lacking from his predecessor, Olaf Scholz. And he said, you know, even though he's a staunch transatlanticist, he was the head of the Transatlantic Bridge, it's called an NGO here, and he said, we're going to spend a lot of money, we're going to invest, and we're going to prepare for a future of European security without America. He said that in not so many words, but this does raise the question that, you know, as much as Germany might be having some domestic instability with the new elections, or rather the early elections, the rise of the AfD, and this failed election first round for Merz as chancellor, it's also not just a domestic question, stability in Germany. It depends on bigger neighbours and in some cases rivals, possibly on the east and to the west now. So I'm not sure that Germany is well prepared for that, having struggled to make it to this point anyway, with a rather not as strong economy as they would like to have.
Yeah, absolutely, James. But, James, what else will be in Friedrich Merz's tray? We know that, as you say, it's been turbulent getting here. Today was a bumpy ride. What lays ahead?
So the first thing is, of course, he's relieved to have made it, because I think there was a few hours where Friedrich Merz has felt like his political career had disappeared after gambling so much and working with the far right. The main issue on his government's lips will definitely be immigration reform and the economy. So starting from today or tomorrow, they will start to push back asylum seekers at the border, rather than letting them in for entry into Germany, where many of them disappear into the system or take years to be processed. So that's what they campaigned on. But I think what really matters is turning the economy around, whether that's through tax cuts for businesses to get investment flowing, or tax cuts for people. But that's, for ordinary people, isn't really on their agenda. I think there's going to be debates about raising the minimum wage, But what business leaders want in particular is tax cuts for them, and also a much clearer energy policy, because as we've seen from Spain and Portugal's blackouts last week, it looks like renewables might not be as sustainable and a method as they may have been.
James Jackson, Berlin-based journalist, always brilliant to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, it is a classic cartoon series featuring America's favourite family. But fans of The Simpsons believe the show has the ability to predict the future. From Trump's presidency to artificial intelligence to Ebola, the TV show's creators have grabbed global attention for its accurate depictions. Here is an example.
We've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. How bad is it, Secretary Van Houten?
We're broke.
The country is broke? How can that be?
Well, remember when the last administration decided to invest in our nation's children? Big mistake.
I'm delighted to say we are now joined by former Simpsons writer, Emmy Award-winning Bill Oakley. Bill, it's an absolute honour to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining me. First of all, The Simpsons never fails to impress fans with their creepy predictions that come true. But years later, do you agree that The Simpsons can and has predicted world events before they happen?
The Simpsons has predicted a few world events, not nearly as many as it's given credit for, though.
Which do you think are the world events that are the ones that are right and that all the people believe are true? What's the best one so far, do you think?
Well, the one you just played about President Trump is by far the most remarkable prediction The Simpsons has made. And there was another one about Disney buying Fox. And a lot of these were things that were they're inspired by real events. President Trump had already, when that was written, had already run for president in some sort of minor way in the 90s. And Disney had already bought up a lot of other companies. So in many cases, it's kind of extrapolating in a funny way what could happen.
As a former Simpsons writer, where does the creative foresight come from to be able to capture a snapshot of human society and be able to look into the future in many ways?
Well, people may not want to hear this, but in many cases, it's trying to predict what the dumbest possible thing would be. The citizens of Springfield are not a bright bunch. And in many cases, the joke is just what would a really stupid mob of people do in this situation? And unfortunately, over the past 30 years, many of those things have actually come true.
Bill, I wanted to ask you something. You've previously said the business of television has collapsed. Is the industry dramatically shifting? And what do you think the future is going to be? Am I still going to exist, or will I be AI? What do you predict for this?
I think you'll probably continue to exist. I would say, though, in terms of TV channel, I think people under 30 really don't know the difference between content that comes from YouTube or TikTok versus content that comes from the BBC or NBC in America. It's all the same. It's all video to them. So in reality, companies don't want to spend a lot of money producing expensive content when the same kind of thing could get just as many eyeballs for nothing on TikTok. And that's unfortunately where the business is right now, because there's so much competition from so many other sources, not just videos online, but video games and so forth, that television is a much riskier proposition than it used to be. So it's kind of like being in the newspaper business was in like 2004.
The Simpsons has successfully predicted the future of Donald Trump becoming the US president, as you mentioned. Will Ivanka Trump, do you think, be the first female US president, possibly?
I'm not going to get anywhere near that question. That's beyond my predictive abilities.
Okay, no problem. But why do you think this series has been so successful throughout the years and one of the longest running? And it seems to sort of go through generations. I remember my parents watching it. I watch it. You know, that the little ones coming along watch it too. Why has it been so successful?
Well, a couple of very obvious reasons. One, it's very funny, and the writers and the producers of the show for 35 years have been able to keep the standards very high. So it's very funny. It's very funny in a lot of different types of ways. So people who are grown up and sophisticated, well-read, can be amused just as much as a little kid who likes it when Homer gets hit on the head. So that's one thing. Also, when I worked there, they told us, don't put in a lot of references to contemporary things because people will still be watching this 50 years from now. So a lot of it is not dated. You know, many of these episodes that are 30 years old don't feel that dated because we purposely wrote them that way.
Maggie was always my favorite. I have no idea why. I loved Maggie. Who's your favorite Simpson, Bill?
Sure.
Yeah, she's the best.
Well, my favorite would be, to state the obvious and to join everyone else, it probably would be Homer, because I find him to be the most entertaining, and I find him to be quite relatable in some ways, because he shares the foibles that a lot of us have.
Bill Oakley, Emmy Award-winning writer known for his work on The Simpsons. It was great to have you on the show. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Tesla's car sales in Britain and Germany have plummeted to their lowest in over 2 years in April, even as demand for electric vehicles rises in both countries. According to national data, car sales dropped 62% in Britain, 46% in Germany. Billionaire Elon Musk's company is preparing to counter competition from European and Chinese EV brands with the launch of a revamped Model Y, which comes out next month. Deliveroo has agreed to be taken over by US giant DoorDash in a deal valuing the business at £2.9 billion. The combined company will have a presence in more than 40 countries, serving about 50 million customers every single month. The merger is also expected to provide fierce competition to rivals Just Eat and Uber Eats in the UK. Turning to sports news now, and Zhao Jingtong has made history after becoming the first snooker player from China to win the World Championship with an 18-12 victory over Mark Williams in Sheffield. Along with the £5,000 top prize, he will climb to 11th in the world rankings when he returns to the main professional tour, and that's next season. The Boston Celtics have suffered a shock defeat against the New York Knicks in a semi-final opener. The Celtics, the current champions, lost 108-105 in overtime. Game 2 in the series will be played on Wednesday night, and that is happening in Boston. A reminder of our top stories. President Trump welcomes Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to the White House. The Kremlin warns Kyiv against attacks as Russia pushes ahead with its planned 72-hour ceasefire. Friedrich Merz is sworn in as German chancellor despite falling short of the majority vote earlier today. And prophecy makers, a former Simpsons writer, just revealed to us why the show is credited with predicting the future. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us next on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next. Plus, of course, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.